Chapter 15. Back to the Graveyard. Nate walked up to the cemetery a few days later. No other living person was there, but the ghosts saw him coming and gathered around, clapping and cheering. Aunt May gave him a big hug. "You did a very good thing, sweetie. I hoped you could. You did better than I had even dreamed possible." Even Mrs. Snow managed to smile. "Excellent work, Nathaniel. Now that you'll be staying, I expect you to investigate the archives." Nate nodded. "I promise." He looked around and saw Misty's grave. Blinking back tears, he walked over to it and looked down at the simple stone. "You gave your life for me. I don't know how to thank you." "Oh, pshaw! Dry those tears, young man," a voice called from up the hill. Nate looked up and saw, skipping down toward him, a very happy Misty, and holding her hand, skipping right beside her, was Matty. A huge smile split his face as they skipped to a stop in front of him. "I haven't felt this good in years," Misty said. "I liked being alive, but dead? Oh, Lordy, all the aches are gone." Nate looked at Matty, and she grinned back at him. "Not too shabby work for a boy," she said. "Just in the nick of time. I heard you call me." She nodded. "When the dam broke, it tore off everything that was a-covering me up. I could feel where my bones was, and I could see 'em like they was shining searchlights right at me. I knew if you could get near enough, you could catch a hold, and we'd both be found." Nate grinned. "Good work. So the Major had to let you in?" Aunt May hooted. "The Major had no say in the matter." Nate was confused. "What do you mean? He's the ghost in charge. That's what you all said." Mrs. Snow shook her head. "You weren't paying attention. He was the ghost in charge, but that position is based on how many attendees came to the funeral. Misty attracted at least 3 times as many people, so—" Nate turned a delighted face toward Misty. "You're the GIC?" Misty smiled and nodded. "Actually, since it was a double funeral, we share the duty. We thought it was best." Looking at Matty, Nate grinned. "So you went from outcast to co-GIC. How's the Major taking it?" "He's madder'n a rooster in an empty hen house," Matty said with a laugh. "I figure he'll stop having conniptions in a year or 2. He ain't so bad, just stuffy. Besides, even he can't squawk seeing the family reunited." "Family?" Nate asked. Matty nodded. "Yep." She squeezed Misty's hand. "That's why she could see me even when she was little. Misty's my sister." Nate shook his head, thinking back to Matty's story. "Wait a minute. You said your sister's name was Tegan, didn't you? Good memory. But after I died, she stayed in the shed. Always did have the sense to stay in out of the rain. Next day, she went out a-wandering, looking for me and some grub. The folks at the next farm found her and took her in. 'Tweren't so odd back then. Lots of folks took in strays." Matty smiled at Misty, "especially pretty little gals. Problem was, Tegan couldn't say her name. Remember, she weren't even 4, and she called herself T, short for Tegan." Nate understood. "So they called her Miss T, right?" They both laughed. "Exactly," Misty said. "Did you know?" Nate asked Misty. Misty shook her head. "No, my ma and pa never told me the story." Matty added, "I never said nothing. Pa weren't sure, and I didn't want him to take aim at her. Also, if she'd 'a knowed it, she might 'a tried some fool thing and got herself hurt." Aunt May walked up. "The funny part is that Matty and Misty were actually aiming toward my house. My mother was the one they were trying to find. She was their mother's sister." Nate stared at May. "But if you are my aunt—" Aunt May laughed. "I'm not actually your aunt, dear. But yes, you and Matty are related. My big sister was your grandma. That's why you could see Matty." Nate leaned against Misty's gravestone. "This is so strange." Matty nodded. "It's a heap for a boy to take in all at once, seeing as how your brains ain't so big and all." Nate shot Matty a dirty look. "After all I did, you almost got me killed." Matty grinned. "'Twas a piece of cake. I knowed you had the stuff to get her done, even if you didn't believe in your own self. Misty patted his arm. You'll have plenty of time to get used to it. Now you have a home with real roots. How did you know we decided to stay? Misty laughed. We have lots of time to find things out. Plus, parts of life that seem very confusing when you are alive make more sense from our perspective. Her eyes twinkled. Besides, you have a lot more to do. What do you mean? For one thing, you have a house full of cats to take care of. Your house? How can we do that? Mom can't even afford to fix the house Aunt May gave us, and Misty shook her head. Don't worry about that, young man. Even before this happened, I knew you were the one. My lawyer will be contacting your mother soon. I changed my will. You are inheriting my house and my estate. Nate shook his head. I don't mean to be disrespectful, but judging from the condition of the house, I don't think that will even pay the taxes. Misty gently smacked his shoulder. Now don't you judge a book by its cover. I happen to like the way that house looks. It is that way because I chose to keep it like that, not because I didn't have the money. Back in the day, my parents owned most of the land around here and sold it at a very good price. You'll find that you and your mother are now actually very wealthy. Nate was so stunned his mouth dropped open and stayed that way. Trying to catch flies? Mattie asked. Or did your brain just blow a gasket? She turned to Misty. I think you might have broke him. Oh, hush, Misty said. It's a lot to think about. Nate nodded. Aunt May gave him a little squeeze. It's been a long day. Maybe you should go home now, dear. Get some rest and come back tomorrow. We have plenty of time to talk. Misty smiled. That's right. All the time in the world. Nate, still in a daze, nodded. He picked up his pack and turned to go. Suddenly he stopped, remembering. Turning to Mattie, he asked, Where are you? Where did they put your... She smiled and held out her hand. He took it, and she led him up toward the edge of the cemetery. Since no one knew who she was, there was just a small post with a number. Nate looked down at the freshly turned earth, then looked around. Across the road he could see the brook that had returned to a gentle, babbling flow. Nearby was a small stand of golden birch trees, their bark still shining from the recent rain. It's a nice spot, he said, and Mattie nodded. Thanks, Nate. It took some doing, but once you got the hang of it, you done right by me. I'm proud to call you my friend. Nate nodded, not knowing what to say. He opened his pack and pulled out a piece of wood. I made something for you. The board is from the bank near where they found you. I used a wood-burning kit I got for my birthday. It works like a pen, but it burns the letters into the wood almost as fast as writing. I didn't know your last name, but I thought... He showed it to her. On it, Nate had burned the message. Mattie, good sister, good friend. Mattie smiled. That's mighty nice, Nate. Nate nodded, knelt down, and pushed the wood into the dirt at the head of the grave. I'll make a better one now that I have time. Heck, I guess I can afford to have a real stone one now. Mattie shook her head. No need. Stones ain't for us. They're for breathies who can't see us. Nate stood and looked at her again. I never had a friend like you. Mattie grinned. I'm willing to bet on that one. Don't know if it's so much of a compliment. Nate grinned back. Well, you know what I mean. Mattie punched him in the shoulder. Get out of here, boy. You need some rest. Nate nodded and turned. He headed down the hill. At the gate he turned and called up to Mattie. See you tomorrow? She grinned. Not if I smell you first, and that won't be hard. Nate waved and turned, heading back to his house and the adventures ahead. The end.